Hi, and thank you for attending this episode of our RUPES Core Series webinar. We appreciate you taking the time to log in, and we have a great panel discussion. We've got some polishing experts. What we're preparing to do for you is offer a question and answer session. The theme is on paint polishing. Some of you have submitted some questions ahead of time. Others will be taking your questions live as you type them in. So what I want to do right now is just kind of check the engagement here before we introduce our panelists. If you could just go ahead and type in the Q&A box. So somewhere on your screen you should have a Q&A box. Just go ahead and type in there where you are. So where you're from, what city, what country. Go ahead and type that in, and we'll kind of check and make sure our engagement's happening here. We've got two of you that have typed in.
Yep, wow, Springfield, Missouri, Ecuador, New Jersey, Florida, Portland, Oregon,
Portland,
Wisconsin, Houston, New York. Hey, Italy, we've got them all over. This is a global audience.
Brazil, oh, nice.
Well done.
Excellent. So I'm Jason Rose with RUPES. I'm our Global Director of Training. I coordinate our training activities. I also run the RUPES Bigfoot Detailing Academy in Denver, Colorado. I ran a detail business for 12 years, many years ago. But I've had this great career working with various companies in training and product development, and I'm very happy to be here with you. We also have Dylan von Kleist here, who's our marketing manager, and he will be operating the controls for this webcast, and will also be taking your questions and screening them and queuing them up for our panel. But at this time, I'd like to kick this over to Italy and have Fabrizio introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Good night for people who are watching from Europe, and good morning or good afternoon for all the other people. Yeah, I'm Fabrizio. I have been working for RUPES for the last 4 years. I'm the training manager here. I work in the warehouse, in the headquarters in Milan, and I'm a chemist. I've been working in paint business for several years, and here we are. I'm happy to be here, and I thank everybody who's watching us.
Yeah, special thanks to you, Fabrizio, because in your time zone at this moment, it's after 1 a.m. in the morning. So kudos and thanks for your waking up in the middle of the night to do this, so we appreciate that. So next we go over also in Europe. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello to everyone, my name is Daniel, so I'm from France. I'm training manager as well for all German and French-speaking countries. I just joined RUPES a few months ago. Before I was also in the paint industry. I was painter for more than 10 years. And after that I was moving for polishing compound producer industry, a famous one, and I was working there for more or less 5 years as a training manager as well. And yeah, now I have the big pleasure to be part of the RUPES family.
Outstanding, yeah, thank you. And then now we'll go over to Florida in the United States, and Todd, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Jason. My name is Todd Helme. I am, well, I don't know if we ironed out my job title this morning. I think Senior Technical Specialist. I'm not sure if the senior exists, but I'm throwing it out into the ether for this broadcast.
Sounds like it comes with a pay raise. So.
Well, as long as I still have a job, I'm the Senior Technical Specialist. So, of course, I've been with RUPES for 6 years. And when I started in the U.S., it was me and another gentleman, Chip Case, who always deserves credit. And we basically were running RUPES out of a warehouse and in our houses. So I was the sales manager, traveled around the U.S., and then as we have grown, my role has shifted, and now I get to enjoy teaching people, and of course working with the greatest team internationally and domestically. So I'm super, super happy to be here, and it's kind of fun to do an event like this, but of course the circumstances and the reason why we're doing it, we hope everybody is staying safe and following regulations, and we'll all get through this together.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. And I do want to acknowledge that, you know, this is a crazy time, and it's a challenging time, certainly for many people. But we want to take this opportunity to focus on our skill set. And so just to give you a bit of coaching on this session of our core series, this is a question and answer session. The theme is on paint polishing, so we would like for you to keep your questions focused on paint polishing. And we're not going to address any other topics at this time, but it's just the time for us to focus on upping our game on our knowledge and skills on paint. Also want to remind you that this is streaming live to Facebook, and the questions and comments that are being posted on Facebook, we are not monitoring at this time. So if you want to engage directly into this webcast, the way to do that is to be on the webinar and actually type your questions in that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen.
Also mentioned we are looking though at those Facebook comments. So if you guys enjoy this content and you want to see more of it, the last session we did earlier this morning for us, earlier in the day for the European team, everybody had positive things to say. So if you guys would like to see more of these open question and answer sessions on a category or a topic, we're more than happy to put together a panel and field your guys' questions. So let us know how you feel about this, especially at the end. Don't grade us yet, because you might be premature in that. Wait till the end and see if we've disappointed you.
Yeah. Well, so with that, why don't we just dive right into questions, Dylan, and kick one out for us to talk about.
All right. Well, I'm going to take one of the ones that was submitted before during the registration period. Christian Maldonado wanted to get some recommendations on tool speed for primarily cutting and polishing. What speeds should he be running his tools? And he has a 15 and a 21.
Well, for Americans, a little bit of speed is good, so a lot is better. Oh, no, that's not the right answer. Let's check to see if Fabrizio's awake. How would you like to address that question?
I'm barely awake. Yeah. Now, of course, unfortunately, it's not that easy. I mean, there's not a speed, which is the correct one. It depends. It depends on what we have to do. It depends on which tool we are using. As we know, we consider 21 to be a little faster in terms of cut than 15. It is debatable, I know. It's something where not everybody is agree, but many people think 21 is a faster tool when cuts and 15 a better tool when we need to finish. I'm simplifying, I know. Which one is the right speed to do the job? It depends. I normally recommend to make it very simple, a speed which is about 4 cut and a speed about 3 to finish. Then many times people, when I say this, says, okay, but why then do you put also 5 and 6, and do you put also 3, 2, 1 below 3 and above 4? Well, that's the reason why the answer is not so simple. We can work, for example, when we install the pad, it's a good idea to run the tool a little faster. So going up to 4 to 5 to 6 if the pad stops the rotation. It's a good idea to go below that 2 or 1 when we start the job, or when we're finishing the cycle. So it is a little bit more complicated, but especially for the people who are starting, who are new to the random orbital tools, a speed about 4 when cutting and about 3 for finishing. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, so we teach a similar speed recommendation at the Academy. It's pretty much speed 4 for operating the tool. We recommend speed 2 on the dial for priming pads. So Todd, do you have any other input on this speed question?
I like to use the least amount of speed that will get the job done. And but the general recommendation is 3 to 4. When the original ES tool on the market, the original random orbital, we actually used to recommend 5 or 6. And then with the Mark II and the increase in torque, we were able to back that off, and you leave a little bit of power in reserve.
Yeah.
There are times when overspeeding the tool can actually reduce cut. And there's a number of reasons why. It heats up the pad, and the pad loses the ability to transfer the orbital action. So we're talking about with the random orbital. But if you're doing like isolated scratch removal or getting into a tight corner, you might bump it up to 5 or 6. But generally backing down to 4 gives you the best balance between cut and pad life. If you operate that thing on speed 6 with heavy pressure, because of the dynamics of a random orbital, you'll kill the pad way too fast. It heats up and loses its ability to transfer the movement. So I think we're all in agreement. 3 to 4.
I think my favorite statement in regards to this is with random orbital tools, it's the lowest speed at which you can run the tool and maintain acceptable rotation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can do it at 1 or 2, it doesn't hurt to do it that slow. I mean, that's a hard thing to do in some cases, but I agree with what you guys are saying. Slower is better if you can do it. Use speed where it's necessary or required, I think is probably
Sure, and sometimes when you're priming the pad, which, excuse me, we recommend speed 2, when you're priming the pad and you're using a little more pressure, there's times when you're working on a specific paint and you actually get more cut using the slower speed with more pressure. So even, you always have to read the paint and kind of how it responds to the tool and the combination you're using.
Yeah, very good. Good question. Good answers. You got another one, Dylan?
We got lots of them coming in, and you guys, these are great questions. I would also mention, if you're looking at the question and answer box, specifically those of you that are on a computer, there's a little thumbs up. So if you see a question that's been asked already and you think it's something you want to hear an answer to, you can upvote that, and I will jump to those faster. So the next one we have is from Claudio, and he wants to know, is wet sanding the only effective way to reduce orange peel? From which grit would it be best to start?
Well, let's see. Let's start with Todd. Do you have an answer on that one?
Yes and no. So there are some pads on the market, denim and velvet pads, where I have gotten good results from them, but that's, for my personal experience, was the exception and not the rule. Generally, if you want to flatten orange peel, the best way to do that is with sandpaper and a hard backing, right? So that paper has to be directly attached to a firm backing, because you have to transfer that surface to the paint. So if you sand with a foam backed sandpaper and a really soft sponge, if you're hand sanding, or a really thick interface pad and foam or foam back paper on a DA, you can sand and not remove orange peel.
Yeah.
The other problem with orange peel removal, if you try to do it with polishing, and sometimes if you talk to a body shop guy, they'll tell you they've done it. And I believe them, but what happens on really fresh paint is when you put a lot of speed and friction into the paint, the temperature goes up. And this causes the paint to temporarily expand. And really, my analogy of a balloon works really well here, because a balloon, when it's deflated, is wrinkled, and you blow it up with air and it becomes smooth. Well, the same thing happens with paint. You put a lot of heat into it and it looks like you've removed orange peel, but when that paint cools off, a lot of times not only will the orange peel come back, but you'll actually get some pinching or some shortwave orange peel appearing, so you can actually add texture to it. The most effective way, I think, for sure, is to sand it.
And using a film disc, as you mentioned, is the most effective way. And then I would like to add that with this question about texture leveling or removing orange peel, there are actually more reasons not to do this than there are reasons to do this. So this whole idea of preserving paint thickness, and yes, of course, if you remove orange peel and texture, the paint looks fantastic and it looks beautiful and has a mirror-like finish and lots of clarity. However, in the process of removing that orange peel, it does remove a significant amount of paint thickness. So
I should clarify the reason I chose that question too is there's a few questions that have come in that are in regards to can I polish out texture. So we've killed two birds with one stone with that one. It's highly unlikely that you will to any large degree, and sandpaper is probably the best approach.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right. So a question from Guy. Guy wants to know, and a lot of people have upvoted this question. He wants 30% of the cars that he does are single stage paint, classic cars. What should he do differently from a base coat, clear coat type paint when addressing those vehicles?
Well, I'm going to kick this over to Todd, especially because he has a lot of experience and background working with classic cars and single stage paint. So go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, in my career as a detailer, for a few years I was specializing in original paint restoration. I did the only 100% original 427 Cobra, a couple original paint Lamborghini Miuras, and for the most part, it's a similar process. The only difference is you see the paint transfer on the pad, but there is a few things I would caution you against. For example, early 80s Magnum PI Ferrari, the 308, 328, and then, they were called Rosa Corsa, right? Race red. And this is a really nice color. It's very vibrant. It was actually originally designed to look good on television. So it almost has an orange hue to it. And the way they achieve this orange hue is by putting red single stage over a yellow primer. And so that if you've ever painted a wall in your house red, or if you're a painter and you've painted red, red is one of the more transparent colors. You've got to put a couple coats down to get an even color. So as you're polishing this red, if you thin it out, if you chase isolated scratches, now more of the yellow telegraphs through the red, and you can actually start to shift the hue of the color. So when it comes to working on like single stage and original paints, really, you have to be knowledgeable of what's underneath the single stage. With clear coat, the more you polish off the clear, it's clear. So there might be a slight color shift because most clear is milky, but it's almost indiscernible. You're not gonna pick up on it. But with some of these older cars, you can actually shift the color one way or another. So I am a big fan of caution, right? Like always be very careful, walk away from deep scratches. Edges tend to be thinner, and avoid overheating it, especially the older paints. So that would be my recommendation.
And as a trainer, I especially like in a classroom environment working with single stage paint because as you mentioned, Todd, you can actually see the paint transfer. You can visually see the load on the pad, so it's fantastic from a training perspective. So Daniel, do you have experience working on single stage classic older cars?
For us in Europe, the single stage paint is not so common. You only found it on very old cars, but the modern cars or even the painters, we always work with clear coat. So I have some experience from my own, but I think far away that much as Todd or you guys have it. So yeah.
And Fabrizio, any other comments?
Well, probably we might just introduce the concept of single stage against double stage paint. I mean, single stage is where I apply a coat which is glossy and colored. So with one stage, with only one paint, I get what I need. I mean, the glossy effect and the color. Instead, all the modern systems, they have a base coat, which gives the color and most of the times the metal effect, and a clear coat on top. Mm-hmm. Why do I have these two stages? Because in this way, I have a top coat, a clear coat, which is clear, it's transparent. It's giving me better gloss, better shine effect, and more physical resistance, because I don't have the pigment, which is introducing some sort of discontinuity to the system. Mm-hmm. So these pigments, they become more absorbent, they are more sensitive to the dirt, to the UV rays. Instead, the clear coat, not having these pigments, they are more compact, they have more physical resistance, more hardness, more resistance to the UV light, so they protect the base coat. They protect the pigment in the lower layer of the paint. So clear coat has been a great innovation in the paint industry, in the paint technology. And so that's the reason why today most of the paints, they have the base coat below and the clear coat on top.
Yeah, thank you for that. I had made an assumption everybody knew the difference between single stage and base coat, clear coat, but that's fabulous that you explained that, because we shouldn't assume everybody knows what that is. So yeah, hopefully, Dylan, we answered that question pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think the main thing to take away for anybody who hasn't worked on single stage is, in terms of what you do, how it's polished, it doesn't change. You're still doing the same general technique. If you're dealing with original factory paint, which it most likely will be, or it'll be a very old respray if you're seeing single stage at this point, you take Todd's advice, where you do have to be cautious, because it's either only original once or that restoration is an old restoration. You're trying to keep it that way. But in terms of how you apply the product and what you physically do, it's about the same. The only difference is you can see the residue coming off of a single stage. You can't see it coming off of a clear coat car. So we've got a whole lot of other questions here. Let's do one. Let's bounce around a little bit here. Let's see. For jeweling, I know Todd, I just saw your eye twitch when I said that word. So Wilson wants to know, regarding jeweling, maybe we can define what that is for those people who don't know. Can they use a forced rotation orbital, or should they just stick with random orbital?
Okay, Todd.
A loaded question.
The inside joke is some people would credit me 10 years ago or more on the old Autopia forums for using that term. And that was just because I was trying to describe a different process. And when I originally started using that term, my screen name was TH0001, I think. Cleverly Todd Helme #1. It was really impressive. But the reason for that term was because a lot of times we were actually using a pretty firm pad on a rotary to finish, and we wanted to describe the process with a pad that had very little to no mechanical action.
So we can blame you for this term now?
Well, I wasn't the original. I copied it. And then, as all things that get spread into the internet ether, the term itself has changed. So it's kind of hard to define what we mean by jeweling. If we're talking about final polishing, then with the correct technique, you can do that with any tool. With a rotary, it's probably the most difficult to get a swirl-free finish, and the technique for that tends to be, low speed, low pressure. With a gear driven, it's going to be similar. I probably have a little bit more pressure on it, just because that sliding motion of the pad. I don't want the face of that pad to become convoluted underneath. And then with a random orbital, I actually increase pressure and reduce speed for the same reason. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but you can achieve a high gloss finish no matter what you want to call the process with any tool movement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's just
I have a follow-up question with that. You know, the term jeweling, I personally equate that with long cycling, you know, more passes, and in particular more passes with less pressure. Is that, Todd, do you think that's accurate? I mean, I pretty much think about it as long cycling.
It's certainly accurate when I was using it 10 years ago. I mean, that is literally what we were doing, is we would final polish it, and then we would switch to a pad that had zero mechanical, like the softest waxing pad we could with the finest polish. And the idea there was to chase it, because you had such a little cut, it took a long time to try to work out that hologram. Mm. But to be honest with you, and this is maybe 10, 15 years ago, the advent of random orbitals, and even then, the orbitals that we had then, if I knew back then what I know today, I would never have used that process, because I could have achieved a similar result with 1/10 a headache in half the time, you know, switching to an orbital, whether it's gear driven or random. So you know, we learn and technology moves forward.
Yeah, right. Good. All right. So Dylan, we have another question.
Yeah, let's change gears a little bit. We've got a couple of different questions that have come in from different places about Uno. So Uno Protect. The first question was speed recommendation for applying, and we can maybe talk about how that changes a little bit, arm speed more specifically, depending on the goals. And then a follow-up to that is, somebody else wanted to know is, can you apply wax over the top of Uno for additional protection?
Well, first thing I'll say that there's a deep dive on this new product called Uno Protect that's available for all of you on our website. You can actually see a tutorial on that product. So if you really want to get the particulars, I recommend you check that out. Is it on our YouTube channel, Dylan?
It's on the YouTube channels as well. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a very good presentation about Uno Protect. Now, getting back to the questions, Fabrizio, do you want to? The question is on Uno Protect, what speed?
Yeah, well, again, there's not a fixed speed, but yes, I get the question. The speed depends again on what we want to do. As we know, Uno Protect, as any all-in-one, I'm talking about this product, by the way, if you don't know it, just to show you.
Look at that. You brought props.
I always go with some bottles next to me.
Oh, there you go.
And it's an all-in-one product, so it's a product that cuts, finishes, and protects, leaves some protection on the surface, waxes, synthetic polymers, sealants. So again, depending on what part of the product you're more interested in, you will change the speed of the tool accordingly. It's a Uno product, so it means that you can use it with any kind of tool. But the most important is, if you want to cut, then you will use more the speed. Instead, if you're more interested in finishing and protecting, you will reduce the speed of the tool to leave more material on the surface. That's the basic rule. Which one is the right speed? It's difficult to say, because it depends on the kind of tool you're using. Rotary, gear-driven, or random orbital. But as a general indication, let's say 4 for cutting and 2, 3, 2 for finishing and protecting.
Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say that the tool speed combined with arm speed is those variables that you can adjust for defect removal. So with this particular product, if you want to remove more defects and still accomplish the job in one step, then you can slow down your arm speed and perhaps increase tool speed a little bit, and you can remove more defects. But Dylan, you had a comment?
I was going to say that pretty much what you were saying, but kind of the opposite end is if it's a job that's primarily just for shining the paint up very quickly and getting protection down. So an express package maybe where correction is not the primary goal. A very fast arm speed, pretty much just spreading the product as fast as you can is acceptable. It's obviously your defect removal goes down, but if the goal is only to make the car shiny and put protection down, and you're not concerned too much with chasing defects, and that's an effective way, and you can be very fast with the product that way, getting around the entire vehicle.
And that is the main goal of this product, is speed. So it's completely meant to be a very fast applied product and get around the car as quickly as you can. That's what that product's all about. So Todd, the other part of that question was, can you top this or layer up with other waxes?
Well, I would assume that you can. I've never tried it, Jason, to be honest. On my truck in the Florida sun, I'm over, I think it was about 4 months of protection, and it's starting to dissipate, right? I mean, and that's what we expect for the life cycle of that product. Could you apply a wax or a booster sealant? Sure. I'm not sure. That's always a loaded question I always used to avoid in a previous career, because you don't know how well that product that you're using is going to layer on top. You don't know the solvent inside of it. Is it going to remove the layer that already exists? So I always kind of leave that up. Try it. If you think you see a benefit or you notice an improvement, great. The polymer in Uno Protect is pretty durable, so it should technically withstand the application of a wax on top. I just don't know how well they would play together.
My recommendation, and I agree with everything you said there, there's two things that come to mind with this question. One of them is whatever you top on top of Uno Protect, whatever that is, you will be changing the physical properties of that surface, the surface tension, perhaps hydrophobic properties, slickness, all that stuff will be changed to whatever you put on top. So the other thing I think about is maybe if you want to top it with something, probably the best recommendation is top it with Uno Protect. So top Uno Protect with Uno Protect, because then compatibility and the surface tension and all those things are maintained.
I'd also add, too, it's important to pay attention to the cure time on Uno Protect. It does need its window to finish setting up. And not that you would definitely cause an issue if you went too quickly, but there's the potential. You're introducing moisture to that surface when it's still in the midst of its cross-linking. You have the potential to kind of cause maybe have a detrimental impact to the polymer protection. So I think our recommendation is 4 hours before it gets wet. Stick to that same general guideline when topping. Don't go any sooner than 4 hours. So maybe it's a wax it the next day kind of reality, or wax at the end of the day kind of thing if you finished early. But
yeah, and Daniel, I know you're new to our training team, but have you had a chance to use this product?
Yeah, I use this product, and I want to add also, I did some tests to top it with some kind of canauber wax or some polymers. I tried, but to be honest, I didn't see any benefits to do it, because at first Uno Protect already have very, very good shine, very good finish, very good gloss. So in terms of gloss, there is no very big difference. And then after that term of protection, it's very difficult to say if you have any real benefit to top it with some other waxes. So for me, we don't need to top it. Uno Protect does its job very well.
Yeah, good point. So back to you, Dylan. You have another question here?
All right, let's stay in the section of compounds for a little bit, since we're already talking about liquids. So Peter, he has a question about long cycle versus short cycle compounds. So maybe we should define what that means, and then he wants to know how would he know which type of compound he's working with.
Yeah, so this comes with sort of an apology on behalf of all compound manufacturers in the industry. Lots of companies are not very good about labeling a product, whether it's long or short cycle, but it is part of the physical behavior of a compound that is very important for the user, and it's becoming more and more important. So short cycle means exactly how it sounds, which is that the polishing cycle of the product is measured in shorter terms. We think of a polishing application in terms of 60-second application time in a physical area that's no wider than your shoulders, perhaps 6 times the pad diameter of whatever pad you're using. But we think of that as 60 seconds, maybe 45 to 60 seconds, and then maybe a 6-pass application. So if in the context of that application, if by the end of the polishing cycle, this product, a product, has dried up on the surface, maybe even the pad has got a little more pad drag, perhaps might have a little bit of dust at the end of it. If that is the case, if that's the experience in the application, then that is likely a short cycle product. Now, a long cycle product at the end of a 60-second application would be very fluid, very lubricated. There would still be like an oily residue on the surface. The product has remained wet through that whole period, very low dusting, things like this. Now, that would be described as a long cycle product. Now, what impacts this cycle time? 2 major things impact this. One is the chemist. So a chemist can dial in, like dials on a radio, they can dial in the cycle time of a compound. So it's actually built into the product, whether it's short or long cycle. The other thing that impacts this is the environment. So the temperature and humidity that you're working in can really affect the cycle time of a compound. Anything else that you guys want to add? Anybody?
Yeah, well, just to say that why we have different cycle length. First, because we have different users. So, of course, there are people who prefer to work longer a product. Then there are people instead who prefer to have short time job done. For example, I am a short cycle guy. I usually after 40 seconds, 50 seconds, I want to see what happens. Yeah. That I often talk to people or watch people working, detailers or body shop who like to work for 3-4 minutes and they don't stop. One single cycle, 3-4 minutes.
Yeah.
The second reason is because sometimes we cannot have some results, some performances with a different kind of cycle. So if I want something really fast in cut, then I need to reduce the amount of lubricants because they will in some sort reduce the efficiency of the abrasives. Again, Uno Protect is a product with a lot of lubricants. It's a very long cycle product. No matter how long you work with it, it will remain creamy, it will remain very easy to remove. Of course, this affects a little bit the performances in terms of cut of the product. And that's why many times we recommend to apply some pressure on the tool. This way, we kind of fight against all these lubricants and let the abrasives in the compound, in the product, work better in a shorter time.
Yeah, agreed. Todd, do you have any comments on cycle time?
Maybe coming at it from a different perspective, but I think one of several common mistakes that detailers make is they get it stuck in their head that the longer you work the product, the better. So when I teach a class, I will do we'll take a stopwatch and we'll time people. And if you don't set the bar and just say, hey, polish a section, it's amazing to see some guys will go 2, 3, 4 minutes on a panel. And the reality is if you test it, at least in my experience, every single time I've tested it side by side, if I make 4 1-minute passes versus 1 4-minute pass, I do 4 times the paint correction.
And better finishing.
And a much better finish. On soft paint residue, the paint that's building up inside the polishing pad actually becomes the limiting factor, right? It's like putting the brakes on the abrasives as that solid material of paint residue builds in the pad. And so as you work past 1 minute, the finish will start to degrade. And on really soft paints, it sometimes will degrade after 30 seconds, right? So I am a big fan, although I prefer the action of a long cycle polish. I like a polish that stays wet. I short cycle my polishing application. You'll very rarely see me go more than 45 seconds in an application, and also with microfiber, that might even be as short as 30 seconds. Right?
Yeah.
So, and then I'm cleaning the pad and going along. So that would be just my thoughts on it. Is limit your polishing. If you can do 4 separate applications in the time it normally takes you to do 1, you've literally sped up your polishing process 4 times and increased your polishing profitability by 4. So it's the easiest change to make, but it's hard to trust it.
Yeah.
The misconception that the longer you work with it, the more it does is prevalent. You know, long cycle compounds cut and work as a cutting for longer, which can and cannot be true in some cases. But I would add on to what you're saying, Todd, is there's the possibility to, if you long cycle a short cycle compound, you have a problem. But if you short cycle a long cycle compound, you don't. So you can make a mistake one way, but you technically can't really make that mistake on a long cycle. You can overcycle a long cycle compound, but if you short cycle it, all that really happens is you've got more compound to wipe off potentially, but you've still done something. If you overcycle a short cycle compound, you may have not only just a difficult wipe off, you might have hazy paint. You could have all kinds of issues. So understanding what you're working with is really, really key, because otherwise, if you are a long cycle guy and you keep hitting something that's a short cycle compound with a long cycle approach, you're going to have a very bad time.
You're walking it completely backwards. And I think a lot of this comes so we get into this debate, and I'm going to go slightly off topic, but I promise I won't talk too much. No, actually, I don't promise that at all. I never promise that. And that would be a lie. But I think it comes back from the terms of like a diminishing versus non-diminishing abrasive and this rabbit hole that people go in. But in the old days, right, the compounds that I'm going to say, we grew up with, most diminishing abrasives break down in a matter of a pass or 2. So it's not this, you don't have to keep working to break it down. It actually happens super fast. But what can happen with the old abrasives is they put in such a deep scratch that you had to work it for a long time to file out the scratch that you originally put in, right? Because that uncontrolled diminishing action puts in a deep scratch, and now you're working it over and over to get it there. But with modern abrasives, even diminishing versus non-diminishing, I don't want to open up that can of worms, but you're never really putting in a deep scratch. So there's really no purpose to keep filing. It's just one of those things, I think that's a hangover from the past, that if we move past it, we'd all be a lot happier and more profitable.
Yeah, I'm personally in alignment with what Fabrizio said. I'm a short cycle guy. That's my preference. And for those of you listening to this conversation, the more you work with compounds, you'll discover what your preference is. You'll actually discover what you prefer. And the way to determine, you can take any product on the market and determine for yourself whether it is a short or a long cycle product. And that is to do a standard application, 60 seconds, 6 passes. And if you find that the product is beginning to dry up or has dried up within that 60 seconds, then that is probably a short cycle product. But if it's very wet and you can actually continue and do more and more passes with the product, then you're probably working with something that's a bit on the longer side. Now, in the RUPES product offering, we have several different compounds, and we actually deliberately have represented different preferences in our formulas. So if you like short cycle products, then our current Zephyr coarse compound is the way to go. That's a short cycle compound. Our Mealy coarse, which is also a blue cap, but the Mealy coarse compound is our long cycle product. That one, you know, you can go many, many passes if you like, and it stays very lubricated. The Rotary coarse compound, our third major cutting compound, that is actually in the middle. We consider that a medium cycle product, so you can actually go both ways with that. So yeah, Daniel, any comments from you about short or long cycle?
No, I think you guys already mentioned that all the points. I completely agree with Todd that a lot of people still have the old technology or old knowledge and think as long as you polish, as better it is. But yeah, in the modern time, we should think in a different way, because compounds, they have nothing to do with compounds from 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The technologies are completely different, and yeah, we need to think a little bit differently. But this is our job to teach the people.
Yeah, and in our training classes in Denver, we actually focus on this during the hands-on section, and it's quite remarkable the aha moments that people get, because when we tell them to count your passes and count them out loud, actually, and Todd, I love your idea of a stopwatch, but actually put some measure of time and cycle on that. And it's remarkable that people think, oh, I'm going to stop here. I normally keep going. And then we take it further.
Very uncomfortable for them every time. It's but I'm not done.
But I'm not done yet. And then for the real non-believers, I actually caused them to do one pass or two passes and look at how much result happens in that short amount of time. And it's remarkable.
Yeah, if you're working on hazy paint, sometimes the best thing you can do, haze-prone paint, right? The best thing you do is just shorten your cycle time. It's incredible the finish you achieve on the first pass and how it just goes backwards. When paint residue builds in the pad, the abrasive can attach itself to the pad, and it stops rolling around and working in an even manner, and it starts scouring the surface. So
yeah.
It's super important to keep the cycle times within reason.
And that's a great point you brought up, Todd, the haze-prone paints. If you find that you're polishing on a car and it's getting hazy no matter what you're doing, one of the technique adjustments is to short cycle the product you're working with, and you'll be able to see if that makes a positive difference or not. Great.
That's an excellent segue. It's like you knew what question I was going to ask next, because the question I have here is, what are the best or recommended ways for cleaning your pads, both during and then after use? So you've got residue in that pad and you need to clean it. What do we recommend?
Well, the more frequent, the better. I think cleaning frequency is the answer is as often as you can tolerate. I know Todd's answer on this, and we'll
then double it.
yeah, and then double it. But pad cleaning has always been an important thing to do, but I think more recently it's become a stronger focus, and with paint technology changing and tools and pads changing, pad cleaning is super important, especially with the objective of doing one-step paint correction. Pad cleaning is super important to maintain that performance. We call peak performance, which represents the cut and the finish and the ability to do that in one step. But Todd, I know what you're going to say, but go ahead and talk about your pad cleaning spiel.
Well, in my opinion, and I don't know if it's even my opinion, I think it's kind of the general rule of thumb, is compressed air is the most efficient way to clean a pad during use. Even if you're a mobile detailer, I would recommend getting a pancake compressor just for pad cleaning, because it will pay itself back in terms of pad life and in terms of actual on-the-paint performance. The number one killer of foam pads on a random orbital polisher is heat. When the pad becomes hot, it becomes elastic. When it becomes elastic, it actually creates a bigger footprint, just like doing a burnout on a drag slick, right? So now you have more traction. So when you have more traction, you're losing performance, and now the pad is flexing more, which puts more heat in it. So we actually call this the foam pad spiral of death. And it's most applicable to random orbital. Rotary, it's not so much, because once the slack is taken up in a rotary, it's actually a pretty consistent ride for a rotary pad. But if you've ever been on a scrambler ride at a fair, that's literally a dual action ride, right? You're orbiting and spinning at the same time, and that's a terrible feeling. It's fun, but it's, that's what your pad is subjected to. So when you clean a pad with compressed air, you're actually blowing cold air through it, through something called a Venturi effect. But pad, when you compress the air coming out, there's a separation of the moisture, and that's actually cools the air. So you actually cool the pad while you clean it. So it's like two major positives. I've heard some representatives of pad companies are now starting to say, in their opinion, that this is dangerous or damaging to a pad. I wouldn't recommend taking a pinpoint nozzle with a super high velocity 1/1000th of an inch away from the foam and blowing it. But, and Jason and I actually talked about this, and Jason has, at the Bigfoot Academy in Denver, I think you have pads that are several years old that are cleaned primarily with compressed air, and they're perfectly fine. I mean, they literally have less damage than you would if you let that residue build up in there. So compressed air. The second part of the question is, how do you clean at the end of the day? And, well, if you don't have compressed air, the only tool that will actually work is the Bigfoot Pad Claw brush tool. No other brush will actually work. It has to be this Bigfoot pad claw, right? But if you don't have access to that, you can use a nylon brush. Microfiber nylon brushes aren't going to be very efficient because of the way that microfiber holds residue. At the end of the day, I wash my pads with a 2-bucket method. It sounds funny, but I have a 5-gallon bucket with degreaser, and I spray degreaser, and I squish the pad around, and then I put it in, I submerge it in a clean bucket and squeeze it so all that residue comes out, spin it on a rotary, and let it dry face down. So.
I'd also inject too another option. If you don't have a compressor, it's not as effective because you lose a lot of the cooling effect, and it's not as good at dislodging compound. But vacuuming with don't use the same crevice tool that you just used on the floor mats, obviously, but have a separate crevice tool and even the brush tool on a vacuum, your shop vac if you're a mobile guy, and break up that compound residue and get it. What you're trying to do is get it out of the pad. I mean, so that's the most effective way to do it. We joke about the claw pad tool, but I mean, if in absence of a vacuum or compressed air, it's the next best thing. It's not ideal, but at least it's better than nothing, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. So another tip, actually, Dylan, that you suggested to me a while back, and now we're using it in the academy, is if you have a real busy shop, you have lots of employees, or a busy shop doing lots of cars, you can actually have a 5-gallon bucket with water only. And when you're done with a pad, you just throw it in this bucket of water and let it sit there until you're ready to do the end of the day cleaning. And the purpose of this is not so much to clean the pad, but to prevent it from drying out. Because when a pad dries out, and that compound is allowed to dry on any pad, it actually becomes more difficult to clean. So the purpose of just soaking it in a bucket is to prevent it from drying out, so that when you do get to the point of cleaning the pads, it'll clean very easily.
And my other tip that I gave you is that you take something like the grit guard insert from your bucket, turn it upside down, and put it on top of the pad so it keeps it submerged. Yeah, and it's not a cleaning method. It's just to buy you time, so you don't have to clean it right then. You just clean it when you have time. Yeah. All right, let's do a little rotary topic here, kind of still tied to pads. Austin wants to know if he uses rotary and wool pad combo. I'm assuming twisted floor ply like our pads, for defect removal, is a 3-step process inevitable, or can he get it down to as few as 2 steps? So basically cut with twisted wool in a rotary, finish with something else, and be, done.
Yeah, I'm going to kick this one over to Daniel to address this one.
Yeah, so I'm a big Rotary fan, as you guys know, and I think it's possible to take it down to a 2-step process with the Rotary tool, even if you start with the first step with the lens tool. So here it's important to know the right combo to use the right speed, use the right polish, and to be sure that you on the first step already had more or less a good finish, to save time and to be sure that with the second step you will remove this haze from the first step. So for me it's possible, and it's quite easy to do a 2-step process with a rotary machine. And we have the great pads for it, we have the great polish for it. So if you use our system, you will have no problem, I think.
I think, and I would add that generally speaking, in a real broad stroke kind of a statement about rotary is if your first step is with that tufted 4-ply twisted wool pad, generally speaking, you are signing up for a multi-step process. Now, how many steps? It depends on technique and paint hardness and a lot of things. But anything to add on that, Fabrizio? And what about multi-step rotary?
Yeah, well, the number of steps that we need to get the job done is always a very common question, no matter if it's a rotary or a dual action. Again, unfortunately, there's no simple answer to that. As Jason was saying, it depends. The right number of steps, I would say, before Dylan was saying the right speed of a random orbital tool is the lowest one that allows the rotation to happen. In this way, I would say the right number of steps is the lowest one that allows the job to be done. When is the job done? We can say that it depends. It depends on the paint. Of course, for a dark color, we will need probably 1 step more or some more attention when we're doing the job. If we're getting paid low amount of money, probably we will have less time to spend on a car, and we will make one less step. So there's no answer to this question. Do I have to do 2 more steps after a bowl-shaped wool pad? It depends. It depends if I'm working on a white paint, on a metallic paint, probably with 1 more step, I will get the job done. If I'm working on a black, non-metallic, solid color paint, probably 1 more will not be enough. But then again, it depends also on the ability. As we all know, rotary machine is very highly dependent on the technique, on the ability of the technician that is doing the job. So there might be someone who's able with 1 only step, with 2 steps to do the job also on a difficult paint. Other people will need 3 because they're not so educated on a rotary polisher. There's no simple question.
Well, I think would we all agree as a panel here, would we all agree that if our expectation is a swirl-free finish, that it's unrealistic to expect that we can do that in 1 step with a rotary and a wool pad? We agree on that?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
When I first started polishing in a body shop 25 years ago, we sure thought we were doing it in 1 step with a wool pad.
It's amazing what fillers can do, isn't it?
It's amazing when your body shop manager tells you the expectation is to be able to see the whites of your eye, like Paul Revere, So we never saw those things in the sun, but I'm always scared to go back to Chicago if I see like a 88, Buick Regal cruising around with holograms down the side. I think that might be
Something that
artifact
you did
from my past, right?
All right, good stuff. So we have a question from Brandon. Brandon wanted to know, in respect to edging, so working edges, outer edges of panels, 15 versus 21. Why is the 21 not as good, or why would we recommend the 15? And he's talking specifically in a high volume production environment. So probably a single tool. You got to get as much of the card done as you possibly can. So why would we not recommend the 21, and why would we recommend the 15 in that situation, both for edging and high volume production work?
Well, and generally speaking, between those two tools and the pad diameter, which is the most impactful part of what we're talking about, pad diameter and orbit diameter. Though with the 21, it's a bigger pad, bigger orbit, which, makes it a very powerful tool. They're both very powerful, but it makes it the least efficient on edge work. So edge work defined as the last, or the outer 2 inches of every panel and the tight curves and contours. The 21 is not performing as great as the 15 in that particular area. So any other comments from you guys on that?
Well, I think the larger the orbit too, the more the less time that pad is spending close to the edge. So when you have a large orbit, you're only covering that edge 50% of the time. With a smaller orbit, you can actually move it up more. So now we're covering it 75% of the time. So the smaller the orbit becomes, generally the closer you can get the backing plate supported to the edge, which is going to increase the performance. For edge work with an orbital, really the Mila is an ideal tool because it's always going to move on that edge. And with a random orbital, you can't stuff it in there as much because there's no forced rotation. So you have to get the orbit to do the cutting, and there's a lot of techniques that will work. But with the Mila, you just put it there and off it goes. So, yeah. But the 15, the smaller you make the stroke, the more effective it becomes on that part. So
yeah,
the Duetto is actually a fairly good edge work tool because it has a 12 millimeter orbit, or the minis or something like that.
And along those lines, if the intention is to do the entire car with the 21 millimeter tool, which I would recommend a multi-tool approach would be more efficient and better results. But if the intention is a one-tool approach, and that one tool is the 21 millimeter Bigfoot, then it becomes technique dependent on the edge work, as you mentioned, Todd. So because of this large orbit and this large pad, if you're going to do the edge work, you really need to take that pad way across the outside edge of that panel. So in other words, the hard part of the backing plate, the blue part of our hard backing plate, that's what really needs to be over the edge, not the edge of the pad. So you're really working it more efficiently. So it becomes technique dependent if you don't have the smaller orbit tool at your disposal, or a smaller pad.
Good stuff. Anybody else got anything else to chime in on that one? All right, changing up materials a little bit here. Steven is a guy who works mostly on RVs, so he's seeing a lot of gel coat. And when he comes across heavily oxidized gel coat, he wants to know if what polisher and what pad would we recommend for addressing that, and summarizing what he said. But so heavily oxidized gel coat, large surface areas, obviously, because he's an RV. What would be the recommended starting combo for something like that?
Well, to start off the answer on this, we need to not assume everybody knows what oxidized gel coat is, but this gel coat is not like automotive paint. It is a completely different material. It tends to be much harder, much thicker, much more porous, and the way that it oxidizes is actually different. So it will oxidize from the top down, and very oxidized boats or RVs, you will have this chalky, pasty material on top. And the strategy here for polishing is you remove that layer of dead material and you've got glossy, shiny, gel coat underneath. So the strategy really is to remove that dead debris on top. Generally speaking, at our academy, we recommend a two-step process. And that's first step could be either rotary or the melee gear driven, because you want a force rotation movement to plow through this material. And then the second step could be with a random orbital polisher to finish it out. Generally speaking, that first step is a wool pad, and the second step is a foam pad. Anything that you guys want to add to that? So let's start with Todd.
No, the wool pad gives you, the problem with the oxidation is it comes off quick, right? I mean, you can actually take your thumb and rub hard enough with a towel and remove most of it. But if you're using a foam pad, that oxidized gel coat is going to clog the foam pad. So you're going to have to stop every 1 foot square and clean out the pad because it's loading up. So the advantage of a wool pad, of course, is the increased surface area. It lets you suck in more of the gel coat, for a lack of a better term. So no, for me, if I'm working on this type of finish, and again, the expectation is generally a little bit lower, I'm running over it with a wool. I'm painting the side of that thing like some of those guys do with the ketchup bottles of compound, and I'm running over that as fast as possible. I mean, I think that's, in terms of efficiency, I mean, that's kind of, there's a reason that technique evolved. Yep. And the more compound you use, the more you have to purchase.
Yep. We like that. And I would also mention we've had a few people actually submit questions, almost the exact same question, but replacing RV with boat. And so the same, if you're dealing with a gel coat, doesn't matter if it's on a thing that's in water or a thing that rolls on land. It's you're still dealing with the same material, and the same things apply. So for all those people who want to know about boats, we answered your question there at the same time.
Yeah, another tip on this question, another recommendation is to use the foam disc sanding technology, because it will plow through oxidation very, very quickly. You use it damp, and it becomes a low friction, low heat kind of a way of removing the oxidation. And then you can go to random orbital for polishing after that. So still a two-step process, but that's another way of doing it. Fabrizio.
Yeah, as Jason was saying, gel coat is a very different material compared to normal automotive paint. It belongs to the family of polyesters, which is a very hard material, but very delicate during the years, and it tends to oxidize. Now the problem is we use it on normally big surfaces like RV and even more on boats, where the expectations, as Todd was saying, are normally quite low in terms of quality. No one wants the same quality of an expensive car on an old boat. But the thing is, first, consider that oxidized gel coat, even when you remove oxidation, after normally weeks, it will partially go back. So the oxidation will start to appear again, because as Jason said, it's something that happens on the surface. So don't expect it to be like new. It will anyway be an old gel coat that will start again to oxidize. And this is the first thing that we need to consider. The second thing is, yes, many times I see people working on a single step because they're not get paid for a two-step. We're talking about hundreds of square meters. I don't know how to say that in your measurement system, but I hope most of the people will understand. We are talking about huge surfaces. So two steps would take a lot of time and they should be paid. So most of the people I see working with rotary and wool pad, one step. Sometimes people apply a second step, and in that case, again, it could be a good idea to use an all-in-one like our Uno Protect, because in this way we can give some kind of protection. We're talking about RVs or boats. They stay outside all year long, many times in the water, boats, many times under the sunlight, so salty water, sunlight, very heavy conditions, giving some protection will not prevent the reoxidation of the gel coat, but it will make it longer in the time.
Yeah, and I think if somebody's RV ends up in the water, they've got other problems. So go ahead, Todd.
No, I'm good.
Oh, Daniel, any comments?
Yeah, maybe we can add also that we have a good product in our portfolio, especially for the boats, for the marine product that we have. We have a very good product who cuts very well and very fast, especially on gel coats. Our marine, the blue label, and it does more or less a very good finish at the same time. So this is a good product for this kind of situation as well.
So hopefully we answered that one, Dylan.
Yeah, I think that covers it. Got an interesting one, and I'll read it first because the question came in. It's funny. He said, please don't use my name because if my boss heard me ask this, he'd kill me. Our body shop.
Did he give his name? Did he give his name?
He did, but I'm going to honor it. He's in a body shop, and they are still using old school rotary buffing techniques and many steps. I'm not going to even list the number because it's comical. He wants to know he wants to make the transition to RUPES and large orbit polishing because he's seen the results. What would we say are the 3 biggest advantages that the shop would realize, the top 3 things that we think they would realize if they transition from old school rotary to new school RUPES random orbital polishing systems? And I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to get him fired because it sounds like he's about to buy a lot of tools.
Well, I've got the 3 that quickly come off the top of my head here is efficiency, meaning less time, less steps, swirl-free finish, and less fatigue and easier for the technician. So how about you guys? What are your 3?
I would say if you go to any body shop, they suffer from 3 problems. Sometimes they don't even know they suffer from them, right? So some of them, but for sure swirl marks is one problem. Second problem is burnt edges. It's so common, especially when they're making an aggressive sand scratch and grinding on it. And then the third is drop back or die back or scratch return. So the advantage of he said a Bigfoot system, I'm going to park this into random orbital, right? Yep. Because we of course make the gear driven melee and the rotary, but the 3 problems I just pointed out are inherent to the movement of a rotary polisher, whether it's a RUPES rotary polisher or any other brand in the world. It's a function of movement. So because of that, the random orbital kind of actually solves all 3 problems. It doesn't create a swirl mark unless you reduce pressure and let that pad whip around really, really fast and put a repeating pattern in it. It's almost impossible to produce a swirl mark. It's not impossible to burn the paint or strike through the paint with a random orbital, but it's, despite some videos, it's significantly more difficult to do that. And especially on edges, because the pad itself will stall, right? It's a sacrificial feature of the tool, and usually the orbital action will stall too, or at least fail to transfer. And then as far as drop back or die back, this is a problem a lot of shops don't even know they have. But if you ask the technician, oh, no, it's fine, it's no problem. You ask the body shop manager, hey, do you ever have cars come back that have some scratches or some dull circles where they DA sanded? And almost always the answer is yes, almost always. And the reason is because when you sand it and then put heat into it, it's blowing up, it's swelling up, the surface is temporarily smooth. And then when the solvent outgasses and the paint cools off, now you're getting a scratch return. So the random orbital, if it's done effectively, particularly on top of good DA sanding technique, it's a very low heat. It's going to inflict perhaps the lowest amount of temperature increase of the different movements, at least how they're typically used. So I think it solves the 3 main polishing problems you run into in a body shop.
Yeah. And I would encourage not only this questioner, the person who asked this, the unnamed person,
The phantom.
the no-name person, which I will respect also. But I would encourage anyone who is in this body shop environment and you want to experience the benefits of this polishing system, I would invite a RUPES representative to your shop. So wherever you are in the world, there's likely someone, either a distributor's technician or a RUPES factory direct technician, that can come and do a demonstration.
I'm not above bribing somebody.
Go ahead, Fabrizio, because I know our European friends have lived this reality a little bit faster than we have. I think random orbital is far more accepted in your body shops than it is in ours. So you're probably the best to comment on this.
Well, one advantage that hasn't been mentioned by my colleagues is the less slinging. So with Rotary, as soon as you start the tool, you will see compound just splattered everywhere, on the panel, on the window, on the floor, on the window of the car. And this happens much less with a dual action. The second thing is the effect that I think you Americans call what you get is what you see, or what you see is what you get. I don't know which one comes first. I mean, with Rotary...
Good enough.
I don't know either.
With Rotary, you normally, I would say all, but let's say most of the compounds specific for Rotary application, they contain fillers. So you never know what you really removed in terms of scratches and defects until you panel wipe, until you degrease the panel with some alcohol or whatever you can find on your market. While our compounds, which are specific for the dual action random orbital application, they do not contain any fillers. So as soon as you remove the residues from the panel, you really have the final results. There's nothing hidden. There's no defect that remained, but you cannot see because somehow it was covered by a filler, by something that was intentionally in the formulation of the compound. So this is an advantage. Also because sometimes you might forget to panel wipe, or anyway, something that you don't see, but then after 1 week, after one car wash, can come out again. And that's a problem because the customer might come back and say, look, this was not like this 1 month ago. How did it happen in only 1 month? I didn't scratch the car. I didn't do anything to this panel, but now I have scratches again.
Yeah, and the sling and the splatter that you mentioned, Fabrizio, is not an insignificant thing, because many shops, they do the compound step, remove their sanding mark, and because of the mess, they actually wash the vehicle to do the next polishing step. So if you don't have that sling and splatter, then it saves a whole bunch of time, because you don't have to do this complete wash between steps. So
yeah, probably because you were asking about Europe. The most important to me is hologram-free finish, which is very important because I believe here body shops are probably doing jobs more carefully than in US. This is my impression.
You're right. You're correct.
Okay, I don't but very important is also what Todd was saying, burning edges. If you burn the edge, and this happens with Rotary constantly, especially if you're not like 4 or 5 years experienced, it happens. This means repainting. Okay, so it means a lot of money, a lot of time, material, and so on and so forth. With Rotary, we never say it's impossible to burn through an edge, but it's very, very difficult. It's very rare it to happen.
you mean random orbital?
Random orbital.
Yes, sorry, I don't know what I said. 15, so probably I said something I was...
It's 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning now.
We'll forgive you.
Starting to feel that leg.
The lack of sling is a great point, Fabrizio. It's not uncommon in the U.S. to see body shops that really don't detail the car before they paint it. So these cars are going into the booth with dirty wheels and dirty wheel wells, and then the painter is throwing compressed air all over it and getting some dust in there, which is probably causing some nibs because they have to detail it after they polish it. So there's 2 body shops in particular that I can think off the top of my head which have actually switched their process and now detail the car before they paint it, which makes sense because I don't know why you'd want to wheel a dirty car into a paint booth. It kind of is such a backwards process, but now that they don't have to do a post detail, they just wipe off the compound. And in a body shop, because the standard is a little bit less, a lot of these guys are doing 1 step and done, right? You imagine you have a car from 2005 that's black. If you do a multi-step polishing process and bring the shine all the way up, it may not match the other body panels if it's a black car or black truck or, so just by doing a 1 step and maybe not getting all of the gloss, but blending it into the rest of the panels, they're saving tons of time with the random orbital.
Mm-hmm. We didn't hear from Daniel yet. So what's if you're selling a random orbital system to a body shop to replace Rotary, what are your 3 key features?
My 3 points are, first one, it's all the people can use it very easily. So it can use it without any big education, I would say, compared to a rotation where you need to be much more experienced to use it correctly. So that's the first point. Second point is you will work as fast, most of the time as fast as a rotary one, but with a much more better finish at the end. And the last point for me, very important one, especially on the fresh paint, is you have less stress for the paint with the orbital one as with a rotary one. So that for me are the 3 most important points.
Very good.
A random orbital to a rotary one.
Very good. Yeah.
I think we gave about 14 points.
All right. Well, we are running up on that 90-minute mark at about a little over 10 minutes left. So I'm going to do some ones and we'll hit them quick if you guys don't mind. So Mike Torres wanted to know if he's removing sanding marks in the 1500 to 2000 grit range. In general, should he use more compound or less compound? It's a strange question. I don't know if there's an even easy answer to this. He's attacking 1500 to 2000 grit sanding marks. I'm going to assume he's using random orbital. Or no, I'm going to assume rotary based on this. And should he use more liquid in that process or less liquid, the compound?
You should try different amounts of liquid to see what works, because that can be such a paint specific. If the paint is porous and sucking in lubricant, you're going to use more compound. Generally, less compound can be more aggressive.
And environmental thing too.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's one of those ones you have to dial that in specifically to the paint you're working on.
Yeah, I don't think there is a specific recommendation on how much compound. Yeah, that's a challenging question because you can't answer it with a specific amount. It depends on variables.
Yeah, that's why I kind of touch on it. All right, so let's see. How about the importance of measuring paint to make a decision on whether or not you're going to polish? Specifically, if you're using a meter, how do you know when you shouldn't polish or sand the finish?
Well, for the Europeans, if you're using a paint thickness gauge, if you're measuring total film build, which means all multiple layers, you're measuring about 75 microns or less, then that is what we would consider a go or no-go decision, and probably no-go on any aggressive procedure. For the Americans, that's about 3 mils of thickness. So 3 mils or less, you want to kind of decide to tell the customer, these scratches you have, we're probably not going to dig for those because of not enough paint thickness to work with.
Perfect. Anybody else want to comment on that one before we go to the next? Good.
I was going to say, if you watch the webinar on the RUPES SPA page, we kind of dig into that particular question and paint type. So if you go to RUPES SPA on Facebook, there's a link to that, and you can actually watch the webinar from this morning, and we had the time to dig into that question a little deeper.
Okay, question from Anthony. He wants to know, he understands that we have the different systems for the different tool movements, but is it okay to mix compounds with different machines? For example, use the melee compound with the random orbital tools.
Yeah, so we've already talked about earlier in this webcast about the different behaviors of our compounds, and one is short cycle, one's long cycle, one's medium, and those user preferences you can apply to the product to different tool movements. So the answer is yes, you can use these products with different movements. We, of course, recommend a system and also a color coordinated compound pad tool system. So that gives a starting place for people to begin to use a system approach. But of course, you can switch products. So
if you use the random orbital foam pads in Zephyr, the blue, short cycle compound on a rotary, that might be a little bit of a rough ride. That might be one worth avoiding. But you can play around with it. What's important is you don't use anything that doesn't say RUPES on the label.
So Diego had a question in regards to all the discussion we had on pad cleaning. He says, if you are blowing out or vacuuming the pads, wouldn't that already remove the abrasive and reduce the cutting power? So blowing out the pads, he's afraid that's going to remove the compound completely and reduce the cutting power. So anybody want to comment on that for Diego?
Yeah, so blowing the pad with compressed air, and it's quite remarkable how this works, but it does a very good job of evacuating or dispersing off the pad material the paint residue. And yes, of course, compound residue and abrasives are being blown off as well. But depending on the pad material, especially microfiber and wool fibers, there's a good amount of the abrasive that actually stays into the pad. So even after blowing, you can actually not add more compound and jump on the paint, and you'll still be cutting because there's still some abrasive left in play. Any other comments there from you guys?
Should always add more RUPES compound.
Spoken like a salesperson. Fabrizio?
If the question is, are we going to remove abrasives from the surface of the pad? The answer is yes. That's what we want to do because we have worked with that.
Then put more on.
Abrasive is gone. It's worn out, so it's not able to do its job anymore. I was talking before about the clear coat, and Jason said when we have a single stage, we see the color transferring from the surface to the pad. When we work with the clear coat, we don't see the color, but the paint is still transferring. So after minutes, we're working with exhausted abrasives and debris of paint. So we don't have any control of what we are doing. So that's why we want to clean the pad, because anything that is on the pad is either a pollutant or something that is not able to do its job never again. So we want to remove it from the surface and add some fresh, new compound and work with that, because that's able to do the job.
Excellent. Well, we're running up on it, so I will well, go ahead and say this. We had so many great questions, and a lot of them submitted even before the webinar, so I wish we could have gotten to all of them, but obviously we can't do that. So for those of you who I didn't either answer by replying in the chat box or that we answered live, feel free to go to either of the websites. If you're anywhere in North America, you can head to rupesusa.com and hit the Contact Us tab and send us an email with your question. If you were watching live on Facebook, we couldn't see all your comments there either. We're doing the webinar, but Same thing for you. If you're in any other part of the world, so you're outside of North America, head to rupes.com, and they have a contact us page there as well. You could submit a technical question. RUPES around the world, all of our staff is working from home. We're answering emails and questions, and so we'd love to interact with all of you if we didn't have a chance to do so during the webinar.
And Dylan, thank you for handling the questions for us. We really appreciate that.
Sure.
Did a smooth job. And Todd, thank you for your comments. And I especially want to thank Daniel and Fabrizio, because it's the middle of the night for you guys, and I really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
So
All
with
right,
that, we will end this, and we'll see you on the next episode of our RUPES Core Series webinars.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys. See you then. Ciao.
Ciao.